The pearl necklace wasn't there. Claire Applegate felt her heart pound with a force she didn't recognize, that accelerated rhythm that only appeared in moments when life decided to turn upside down without warning. She was on her knees in the master bedroom, her hand reaching into the dresser drawer as if with enough willpower she could materialize what had disappeared. But the drawer was empty. Only a folded satin scarf rested at the bottom, like a flag of surrender. From the hallway the voice arrived before the person. "Claire, I've come for the necklace for tomorrow's dinner." Mrs. Martha Ashton Drummond entered the room with that firm step of someone who carries decades of certainty about everything. She was a beautiful woman, with well-kept brown hair. 52 years lived with the elegance of someone who never had to worry about bills. She wore a beige linen dress and gold sandals, and when she saw Claire kneeling before the open dresser, something crossed her face, a quick shadow that Claire couldn't quite name. "The necklace isn't here, Mrs. Martha," Claire said, slowly rising. "I looked in the drawer, behind the music box, everywhere you usually leave it. I can't find it." Martha crossed her arms. She looked at the drawer. She looked at Claire. "You were the only person who entered this room today." The sentence fell like a stone thrown into a well. Claire felt the impact before even processing the meaning. "Mrs. Martha, I cleaned the room this morning like every Tuesday. I dusted, made the bed, folded the clothes that were on the armchair. I didn't touch your jewelry, never touched it." "I didn't say you touched it." Martha paused, a small, precise pause, one of those that hurt more than any shout. Yet, 15 years. Claire let that number settle within her like an anchor. 15 years in that house. 15 years waking up at 5:30 in the morning in Islington, taking 2 buses to the Kensington neighborhood, arriving punctually at 7 o'clock. 15 years washing, ironing, cooking, taking care of Isabella when the girl was still crawling down the hallway. 15 years without missing a Friday, without leaving a dirty dish in the sink, without breaking even the silliest cup from the imported set. And now that small pause was worth more than 1,000 accusations. "I'll call Marcus," Martha said, and left the room before Claire could reply. Claire stood still in the center of the room. Through the window, London continued with its usual indifference. A plane cut across the lead-colored sky. Below the street had its usual movement, a bicycle delivery person, a mother with a stroller, the world turning without realizing that, in that room decorated with Italian furniture, a woman's life was being put on the scales. In the golden cage near the window, Laurie opened an eye. The true Parrot was the offspring of a gift Dr. Marcus had given his daughter Isabella 4 years ago, when the girl was 12 and asked for a pet at every meal. Laurie was vivid green, with a red mask around his beak and yellow eyes that seemed to hold judgments. He would stay quiet for hours, then utter a phrase at the least expected moment, and the family had learned to live with that presence, at once amusing and slightly unsettling. "Laurie wants a biscuit," said the Parrot. Claire took a deep breath. Not even in the most difficult moments did she fail to smile at Laurie. It was she who changed his water, who hid the treat behind the cage before giving it as a reward, who talked to him on silent mornings while the family still slept. "Later, Laurie. Now is not the time." Footsteps in the hallway. Voices. Dr. Marcus was arriving. Marcus Drummond was 55 years old and had the posture of someone who had spent his life believing that posture solved problems. An engineer by training, an entrepreneur by vocation, he managed a medium-sized construction company in South London, always wore a dress shirt even at home, and had a habit of twisting his wedding ring when he was nervous, that minimal, repeated spin that the family already knew how to recognize. Upon entering the room, he twisted the ring 3 times in a row. "Claire," he said, with that grave tone of an important meeting. "Martha told me about the necklace. The necklace is gone, Doctor. I don't know where it is." "It's a natural pearl necklace," Martha said, entering right behind him. "Valued at £18,000. It was my mother's." Claire looked from one to the other. There was something in the way the two positioned themselves, he near the window, she near the door that seemed rehearsed, like a scene that needed a third character to make sense. She was that third character. "Dr. Marcus, Mrs. Martha, I've worked in this house for 15 years. Every week, every hour, I've taken care of everything here as if it were my own. If I had taken anything, you would have noticed much sooner. I ask that you look better before—" "We've already looked," Marcus interrupted. The ring twisted again. The question now is what to do. Claire thought of her daughter Patricia, enrolled in the second semester of nutrition at the private college in Bloomsbury. She thought of her mother, Mrs. Connie, 72 years old, hypertensive, who depended on the health plan Claire paid for with her salary. She thought of the bills that wouldn't wait, the rent for the small apartment in Camden Town, tomorrow's bus she would need to take to continue being who she was. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. Marcus took a deep breath. "We're saying we'll have to terminate your contract." The word terminate sounded too absurd to fit in that room. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. Beside the window, Laurie tilted his head to one side, then to the other, with his way of observing the world as if he knew something humans hadn't yet perceived. "Laurie saw," said the parrot suddenly. The three turned to the cage at the same time. Laurie saw everything. The silence that settled in the room was different from the other silences of that day. This one carried the weight of revelation, the texture of a secret about to unravel. Marcus twisted his ring a fourth time. Martha opened her mouth and closed it. And Claire, who had spent the entire afternoon holding back tears, with the strength of someone who learned early on that crying at work was a luxury she couldn't afford, felt for the first time since the drawer had revealed itself empty, that perhaps, just perhaps, the truth had found a voice to speak for her. A voice with green feathers and an orange beak. "Laurie saw everything," the parrot repeated, with the mechanical and yet disturbing precision of those who never lie because they never need to. Laurie had never said that phrase before. This in itself was strange, because parrots repeat what they hear, and those three words, spoken with that specific intonation, sounded like something recorded and awaited, a cassette tape rewinding to the exact moment to be played. Martha was the first to move. She walked to the cage with careful steps, like someone approaching something that might break or bite. "Laurie," she said in a tone of voice Claire had never heard from her employer, a low, almost pleading tone. "What did you see, darling?" The parrot turned its neck to the left, then to the right. It pecked at the golden bars. And then, with that actor's diction that parrots sometimes surprise their owners with, it reproduced a male voice that everyone in the room recognized immediately. "You can hide it behind the books. No one will look there." The room was suspended. Claire didn't breathe. Martha slowly turned to her husband. Marcus Drummond had stopped twisting his ring. His right hand was parallel to his body, fingers slightly open, and there was an expression on his face that Claire could only describe as the face of someone who had just realized the ground was giving way beneath their feet. "Marcus," Martha's voice was thin as a nylon thread. "What does that mean?" "You can hide it behind the books," Laurie repeated, with the indifference to human drama that only animals possess. It was at that moment that Isabella entered. The couple's daughter was 16, her hair tied in a messy bun, headphones hanging around her neck, and a laptop under her arm. She assessed the scene with that immediate perception of teenagers who grew up in tense homes, sensing the temperature before understanding the reason. "What happened?" No one answered. Laurie answered for everyone. "You can hide it behind the books. No one will look there." Isabella looked at her father, looked at her mother, looked at Claire. "Auntie Claire, why do you look like that?" Claire realized her hands were clasped in front of her body, as if praying, and there was a dampness in her eyes that she hadn't been able to contain this time. "Your mother and father thought I took the pearl necklace." "Isabella," the girl's mouth dropped open. "But that's—" She looked at her parents with the frontal, non-negotiable indignation that only young people can muster. "That's absurd. Auntie Claire has been here for 15 years. How could you—" "Isabella." Marcus's voice was firm, but there was a crack in it that Claire noticed, and his daughter certainly did too. "It's not a good time." "Behind the books," said Laurie. Everyone looked at the bookshelf. The library was on the east wall of the room, 6 dark oak shelves with bindings of all kinds. Some books Marcus actually read about engineering and business. Others, Martha collected for pleasure, some that had been there since the house was bought and had never been opened. It was a bookshelf of mixed appearance and purpose, and for that very reason, it wasn't the kind of place where a person would instinctively look for something hidden. Martha went there with quick steps. She started pulling out books, first from the second shelf, then the third. Boxes of old letters, a photo frame turned to the wall with a picture Claire had never been able to see properly. And then, behind a row of books on the fifth shelf, between a novel by Jane Austen and a guide to Italian architecture, Martha found the jewelry box. It was a small mother-of-pearl box that Claire recognized from having polished it hundreds of times. Martha opened it with slightly trembling hands. The natural pearl necklace was inside, carefully coiled exactly as it had been stored, undisturbed. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences of that day. It was the silence of a sentence being pronounced without words. Martha turned to her husband with the open jewelry box in her outstretched palm, like someone presenting evidence in court. Marcus said nothing. Isabella put her hand over her mouth, and Claire, who had spent the last few hours being treated as a suspect in a crime she hadn't committed, felt such immense relief, and at the same time such deep pain, that the two sensations together almost knocked her over. "Marcus," Martha said, and now her voice was no longer thin. It was thick with something that wasn't anger yet, but was building its way there. "Are you going to explain what Laurie heard? Are you going to tell me who was in this room hiding my jewelry and saying no one would look there?" Laurie, as if he had been waiting for exactly that cue, uttered another phrase. This time the reproduced voice was not Marcus's. It was a voice Claire didn't recognize, thicker, rougher, with an accent that wasn't London. "With the insurance? You pay off half. We'll negotiate the rest later." Martha stood motionless. Isabella slowly lowered her laptop onto the bed. Claire didn't understand everything yet, but she understood enough to feel that that afternoon had turned into a much bigger story than a missing necklace. Marcus Drummond sat on the edge of the bed, hands on his legs, shoulders slumping in a surrender he clearly hadn't planned to make. There was a fatigue in his posture that wasn't recent, that was from weeks or months carried in silence, and Claire, who had cleaned that bed countless times and knew the way each person in that house moved through the space, recognized in her employer's husband the posture of someone who had finally reached the end of a long and exhausting escape. "With the insurance, you pay off half," Laurie repeated, with the serene implacability of those who don't know they are detonating a bomb. Isabella looked at her father. "Dad, what did you do?" And it was his daughter's question, simple and direct as only a teenager can make it, that finally broke Marcus Drummond's last resistance. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, there was a mixture of shame and relief that Claire recognized as the expression of someone who had carried a secret too heavy for too long and had just been released from it, albeit in a way he had never imagined. "I'll explain everything," he said. His voice was hoarse. "But first I need to apologize to Claire." He stood up, looked at her directly, and that gaze had a weight that no position or bank account could buy or sell. "I made a big mistake, more than you even know yet." Laurie tilted his head and remained silent, as if he knew it was now the human's turn. They went down to the living room because the bedroom had become too small for that conversation. Claire went along, not because anyone invited her, but because Isabella took her hand in the hallway and said, with that youthful firmness that sometimes surprises adults, "You stay, you have the right to hear everything." Laurie came in the cage that Isabella carried with her, because the girl said the Parrot had proven he deserved a seat at the meeting. The Drummonds' living room was large and well decorated, with a sand-colored leather sofa, a smoked glass coffee table, abstract paintings on the walls that Claire had cleaned so many times. She knew every brushstroke by heart. It was a room made to impress visitors, not to confess failures. And there was something incongruous about seeing Marcus Drummond sit on that impeccably postured sofa and begin to dismantle himself piece by piece. It started 2 years ago. That's where the story really began, though the roots were older. The construction company had lost 2 large contracts in a row, a condominium in Reading that was cancelled by the developer and a commercial project in Canary Wharf, whose client had declared insolvency. The market was difficult, costs had risen, and Marcus, who had always run the business with a comfortable margin, found himself for the first time in his life having to choose between paying employees and honoring commitments to suppliers. "I should have told you," he said to Martha without lifting his eyes from the floor. "But I thought I'd fix it. I always thought I'd fix it." The first gamble had been on a stretch of land in the Yorkshire Dales, a tip from a club friend that promised quick returns. There were no returns. The second gamble had been on a foreign exchange operation that a financial advisor had presented as safe, and which Marcus had understood too late was neither one thing nor the other. And then came what he called looking at his open hands on his knees, a period of very bad decisions. "Gambling?" Martha asked, with a stillness that was more frightening than if she had screamed. Marcus closed his eyes. "I started at the online casino. I thought it was fun. Then it turned into a way to try to recover what I had lost in investments." He opened his eyes. "It didn't work that way." Isabella hugged her knees on the sofa beside her mother. Claire sat in the armchair, hands clasped in her lap, as she always did when waiting for instructions on what needed to be done in the house. But this time there was nothing to be done with her hands. It was all a matter of the heart. "How much?" Martha asked. £250,000, Marcus said. 50,000 with Walter. "Who is Walter?" Laurie answered before Marcus. The reproduced voice was the same strange, rough one as before. "Walter fixes things. Walter doesn't forget." Martha looked at the cage and then at her husband, with an expression that combined horror and a kind of perverse gratitude for the parrot. "Is this Walter the loan shark? Is that who you were talking to in that room?" Marcus nodded. "He came here last week. I didn't know how to pay. He suggested that if the jewelry disappeared, the insurance would cover part of the debt." He stopped, swallowed hard, "and that if suspicions arose, the investigation would take longer, and I would have time to raise the rest." The silence that followed lasted long enough for each person in that room to feel the exact weight of what had been said. Claire was the first to speak. She didn't shout. There was no shouting in her at that moment, only a cold, precise clarity, like ice water. "You were going to blame me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement placed on the floor between them, like a piece of evidence. Marcus didn't look away this time, and that, Claire had to admit to herself, was at least a form of courage, albeit belated. "Yes." "And tomorrow you were going to call the police?" Laurie, as if he had rehearsed exactly for this moment, said, "Call the police in the morning. She can't prove anything." Isabella sprang from the sofa. "Dad!" Her voice broke in the middle of the word, like a dry branch. "How could you? Auntie Claire has been here since I was born. She taught me how to make banana bread. She stayed by my side when I had dengue fever. The girl didn't finish. She went into the bathroom and closed the door. Martha stood still. There was a rigidity in her that wasn't stone because stone doesn't tremble, and she was trembling slightly, almost imperceptibly. But Claire, who was used to reading that woman's states through the small signs that a day of working together taught, could see it. It was the tremor of someone containing something very large within a very small container. 15 years, Martha said to her husband, her voice very low. "You were going to destroy this woman's 15 years, her reputation, her life, to buy time with an insurance company." She paused. "Because of bets." Marcus didn't answer. Claire thought of Patricia, her daughter, who had studied the entire semester with the pride of being the daughter of an honest woman. She thought of Mrs. Connie, who told neighbors on Willow Creek Lane that her daughter worked for a good, trustworthy family who treats her well. She thought of the 15 years of buses taken in the dark, of meals prepared with care, of Isabella's birthdays where she arrived early to decorate the room. She thought of what would have happened if Laurie hadn't spoken. It would be her now answering questions for a police officer, trying to prove she hadn't done what she had never done. The crisis was not small, and there was something more, Claire felt, something that hadn't been said yet, a final layer beneath it all. She knew this kind of pause in men who carry secrets well. It was the pause of someone who had not yet revealed the greatest weight. "There's more," she said, looking at Marcus. It wasn't a question. And Laurie, the green parrot in the golden cage, tilted his head to the side with that bright yellow eye, as if awaiting the next session of a confession that still had many pages ahead. Isabella returned from the bathroom with reddish eyes but her chin held high, sat next to her mother, and crossed her arms with a resolve that seemed to say she had decided to face the rest of the story standing, or at least sitting, with dignity. Martha didn't move to greet her or push her away. She stayed in the same spot, the jewelry box still in her hand, as if she didn't quite know what to do with it, now that it had been transformed from a family heirloom into proof of a crime. "There's more," Claire repeated, and this time the phrase was more an invitation than an accusation. Marcus stared at the coffee table for a few seconds that seemed longer than they were. Then he raised his eyes to the cage. Laurie was quiet, which somehow seemed worse than when he spoke, because it was impossible to know what the parrot was saving for the next hour. "There's an offshore account," Marcus said. Martha blinked once. $100,000. He said the number like someone ripping off a bandage all at once, because slowly it hurts more. "In an account in Portugal, money that isn't declared here in the UK. Laurie chose this precise moment to reproduce a speech that must have been said in the upstairs office that same week, in a phone conversation the parrot had overheard through the half-open door. The voice was Marcus's own, lower, more conspiratorial than he used in everyday life. "If I touch that, the tax authorities will investigate everything. I'd rather leave it there and find another way here." Martha stood up. She went to the window. She stood with her back to the room for a moment, looking at the garden she herself had planned 12 years ago, the mulberry trees and gardenias that Claire watered every Monday morning. When she turned, there was an expression in her eyes that Claire had never seen in that woman in 15 years of living together. Not anger, not resentment, but something deeper and more serious, which was the look of someone who had just completely revised the image they had of someone. "You preferred to blame Claire," Martha said slowly, weighing each syllable, "than to use that money to pay your debts." It was a statement, but it had the form of a philosophical question, the kind for which there is no sufficient answer. Marcus opened his hands in a gesture of someone who has no more defense. "I feared that if I touched the money, the auditors would investigate where it came from. And then everything would come out, the company, the debts, the gambling. I would lose everything at once." "You were going to lose everything anyway," Claire said. There was no cruelty in the phrase. There was only the kind of practical truth that women who support entire families on their shoulders learn to see more clearly than those who have never had to calculate the real cost of choices. Marcus looked at her, and in that look there was something Claire identified as recognition, the recognition of someone seeing for the first time the real dimension of a mistake. "I know," he said. "I know that now." Isabella got up from the sofa and went to Claire. Without warning, the girl knelt in front of the armchair and took the housekeeper's hands in hers, that young, uncalculated gesture that adults usually lose with the years. "Auntie Claire, I want you to know that I never believed it, not for a second, and neither did my mum." Martha, from the window, nodded. There was a dignity in that nod that came at a high cost, because it meant admitting that, despite not truly believing it, she had let her husband lead the accusation far enough for the word terminate to be uttered, and that weight wouldn't disappear with just a nod. Both knew that. "Trust doesn't return the same way it leaves," Claire said to Isabella with affection but with firmness. "But thank you, my dear." It was at that moment that the intercom rang. The four looked at each other. It was 1940. Laurie ruffled his feathers. "Black car outside," said the parrot with that strange, thick voice that had spoken 3 times already. "Walter has arrived." Isabella went pale. Martha returned to the center of the room. Marcus stood up so quickly that he bumped the coffee table, and the jewelry box Martha had placed there fell to the floor with a dry thud, the pearls rolling across the parquet like miniature full moons scattered across the floor. "He said he'd come at 2100, Marcus said, looking at the clock as if it could be wrong. "There's still over an hour left." "Well, he's early," said Claire, who had also stood up and was going to the window to peek through the gap in the curtain. In the street, a black car with tinted windows had stopped in front of the gate. 2 men were getting out. One of them she didn't know. The other, by his wide, firm walk, matched the rough voice Laurie had repeated all afternoon. Martha looked at her husband. "Do you have the money?" "Not here. The money is in Portugal. To transfer it, I need to go to the bank, fill out a form, justify the origin. The bank is already closed." "So what do we do now?" Isabella asked. And her voice had that mixture of fear and courage that Claire had learned to recognize in young people, who suddenly grow up due to circumstances. Claire looked at the gate, looked at the family, broken and reconstituting itself in real time around her. She thought of what her mother, Mrs. Connie, used to say when things were difficult in Hopewell Village, back in the Cotswolds. Before they moved to London, a difficult problem requires a cool head and a firm step. "First thing," she said, with a calm that surprised everyone, including herself, "no one panics. Second thing, Dr. Marcus and Mrs. Martha will go outside to talk to this man and buy time. Third thing, we'll think together about what can be done." Martha looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you helping us after what happened today?" Claire didn't think long before answering, "Because Isabella is in this house. Because family, even when it makes mistakes, is still family. And because buying time now gives us a chance to resolve this properly tomorrow." The intercom rang again, longer this time, with the impatience of someone not used to waiting. Laurie flapped his wings once and fell silent. And Claire Applegate, the housekeeper who had started that day making a bed, found herself standing in the center of a living room too expensive for her and too cheap for what truly mattered, being the only steady hand of reason amidst a family that had lost its own. Marcus and Martha went out the front door together, which Claire noted as an important detail. In the last few hours, that couple had fractured and refractured in ways she was still processing. But when the situation demanded a united front, they went together. There was something significant in that. Isabella stayed inside with Claire, both at the living room window with the curtain ajar, 2 fingers, watching the couple walk to the gate. Claire had asked the girl to stay out of sight and not to open the door for any reason while her parents were outside. Isabella had agreed without question, which said a lot about how much the afternoon had changed the girl who had entered the room with her laptop under her arm a few hours earlier. Laurie remained in his cage, quiet and vigilant, with that yellow eye that seemed to process information that the humans around him couldn't access. Outside, Claire saw only Marcus and Martha's backs and the silhouettes of the 2 men near the car. The conversation lasted over 20 minutes. Claire couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. The 2 men outside were direct and impatient. Marcus negotiated with that engineer's posture, calculating tension in structures, and Martha, surprisingly, kept her chin up with a firmness Claire hadn't expected to see that night. When the couple returned inside and the door closed behind them, Isabella was the first to ask, "So?" Martha leaned her back against the door and closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, there was a mixture of exhaustion and a kind of hardened determination like metal that had passed through fire. They agreed to wait until noon tomorrow for a partial payment. "How much?" Claire asked. $80,000, Marcus said. "They're giving us another month for the rest." Claire quickly did the math. The money in Portugal was $100,000. 80 would go to the payment, 20 would remain. The transfer would need to be made in the morning at the bank in person. It was possible. Complicated, full of risk, but possible. "You have to get to the bank at 9 o'clock, she said. "As soon as it opens, bring all the account documentation, justify the transfer as an investment for return." She looked at Marcus. "For the bank won't ask too many questions if the story is coherent and you appear calm and unhurried." Marcus looked at her with an expression she took a moment to name. It was respect. Not the formal respect an employer has for someone who provides a service, but the other kind, the one that comes from recognizing competence where it wasn't expected. "You've solved difficult situations before," he said. It wasn't a question. "Every week," Claire said, without malice. Martha went to the kitchen and returned with a glass of water for each of them, that automatic gesture of care people have when they don't know what else to do and need to move their hands. She placed the glass in front of Claire with a different attention than usual, more conscious, as if she were seeing the act of serving from a new angle. "Marcus needs to stop gambling," Claire said after taking a sip. The statement had been in the air for a while, but no one had said it in those exact words yet. Marcus nodded. "I know that. Knowing isn't enough. My brother went through this. He spent 2 years thinking he knew, that he could control it, so that he would stop when he wanted to. It only changed when he joined a support group. There's one here in the neighborhood at St. Michael's Church on Elmwood Avenue, every Thursday at 7 in the evening. I can give you the coordinator's contact. There was an intimacy in this offer that didn't match the protocol of that day. Claire realized this as she spoke. But it was past time for protocols. Marcus swallowed hard. Thank you, Claire. No need to thank me yet. You need to go. Isabella gave a short laugh that came out as a sob. Martha, for the first time that night, managed something resembling a smile, small and tired, but genuine. They stayed up until 11 at night organizing documents, calculating values, preparing what Marcus would need to present at the bank. Claire stayed, not because anyone asked, but because there was a logic to it that she herself couldn't abandon halfway. It was like a pot on the stove that you don't leave unsupervised until the end. When everything was organized and Isabella had gone to sleep, Martha sat next to Claire in the kitchen. The house was quiet. Laurie slept covered with the linen cloth Claire placed every night, so he wouldn't be agitated by the hallway light. I want to apologize to you, Martha said. There were no circumlocutions in the phrase. It was direct as a look in the eyes. Not because Laurie proved you didn't do anything, but because I should have said immediately that I didn't believe it. I remained silent when I should have spoken. Claire looked at the cup of coffee in front of her. She thought of the many mornings she had made that coffee, on the same stove, in the same cup. She thought of how long a sincere conversation in that kitchen had taken to happen. Silence is also a choice, and she said, but I accept. Martha nodded. I want to give you a 50% raise starting next month, and I want to create a retirement fund for you. I know it's late, but it's not late, Claire said. There was a gentle firmness in her voice, that firmness of someone who had lived long enough to know that receiving with dignity is as important as giving with generosity. I accept. Martha looked at her for a moment. Regardless of what happens with my marriage, she said softer, you are family. That doesn't change. Claire didn't respond with words, but she placed her palm over Martha's hand on the table, the simple gesture that sometimes says what no language can. The next morning, Marcus woke at 6. He had coffee alone, put on the most sober dress shirt in his wardrobe, took the documents organized in the folder Claire had prepared the night before, and went to the bank, even before the rest of the house woke up. At 8:57, he was in the manager's waiting line, with the documentation in hand and the story rehearsed. The transfer was approved. At 11:30 in the morning, Marcus and Martha stood on the pavement in front of the gate, with a black briefcase containing the transfer documents, when the dark car arrived at the agreed time. The delivery was made. The two men verified, agreed to the 1-month deadline for the remainder, and drove away down Kensington Street, without looking back. Marcus stood on the pavement after the car turned the corner, and Martha stood beside him. They didn't touch, but there was between them that silent closeness of two people who had faced something together and survived, and who weren't yet sure what that meant for the future, but knew for certain what that morning had meant. Claire saw them from the living room window, with Isabella beside her, and felt that the most urgent part had been resolved. But there was more to do. There was always more to do. The company, Claire said when the couple entered. There was no way to postpone that conversation. We need to talk about the company. The conversation about the company lasted 3 hours. They sat around the kitchen table, which was where the most real conversations in that house had always happened, even if until then most of them had been about weekly menus and cleaning schedules. Marcus explained the numbers with the painful precision of someone who had involuntarily memorized them at 3 in the morning during months of insomnia. The construction company owed suppliers, employees for accrued overtime, and there were 2 ongoing labor lawsuits that he had omitted from Martha. When he finished, Martha remained silent for a time that Claire didn't clock, but which seemed long enough for an entire life to be reviewed. Isabella drew small circles in the margin of the notebook she had brought to take notes. Laurie, whose cage had been moved to the kitchen that morning because Isabella declared he deserved to participate, occasionally pecked at his wooden perch with the serenity of someone who had done his part and was now observing the developments. Sell, Claire said. 3 heads turned to her. The company. Instead of trying to save what's sinking, you sell it. Pay everything with what comes in. settle the debts, liquidate the lawsuits, close commitments, and start from scratch with what's left. Selling an indebted construction company isn't easy, Marcus said. Selling is easier than managing something that's draining everything, she replied. There was that practical clarity again, which didn't come from an MBA or consulting, but from having calculated for 15 years the real cost of every hour, every pound, every choice that seemed small and wasn't. You have a name in the market, you have a client portfolio, you have equipment. That has value even with debts. The right buyer will see that. Marcus stared at the table. Martha looked at him and then at Claire. She's right. Isabella put down her notebook. If you sell the company, will you sell the house too? Martha and Marcus looked at each other for the first time with something different from the other looks of that day. It was the question that immediately laid bare everything concrete in that drama. The Kensington house, the Italian furniture, the garden with mulberry trees, the sand-colored leather sofa. Probably yes, Martha said slowly, like someone discovering a truth at the same time as she pronounced it. And you know what? I think I can live with that. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she said with that adolescent agility that doesn't carry decades of material attachment, "It's okay. We moved here when I was 4. I don't even remember the house before." That afternoon, Marcus called the only competitor in the sector with whom he had maintained a respectful relationship over the years, a businessman from Croydon named Raymond Vickers, who had tried to buy the construction company 2 years earlier and had received a firm no. Raymond answered on the second ring. He said he was still interested. He presented an offer the next day, below the value the company was worth in better years, but enough to pay all debts and leave a respectable initial capital. Marcus signed. It was the day after the signing that Martha called Claire for a private conversation in the garden. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of late autumn London afternoon where the sun appears golden and hesitant between the clouds, and the gardenias Claire had watered for years exhaled a perfume that seemed especially intense that day, as if they knew something was ending and beginning at the same time. "I have an idea," Martha said. She was sitting in the iron garden chair with her hands clasped, and there was in her that posture of someone who had thought about something for days and finally decided to speak. "And I want you to listen with an open mind before you answer." Claire sat in the chair beside her. "I'm listening." "You won't be working for me as an employee anymore." Claire's heart didn't sink, because she had learned in those days to wait for the complete sentence before reacting. So she waited. "You'll work with me as a partner," Martha said. "I've always wanted to have a guest house. Ever since I was young, even before I got married. That was a dream I kept on a shelf because Marcus had his company, and I had the house and Isabella, and life just happened." She looked at the garden. "But things have changed. We're going to sell the mansion, and with what's left after paying everything, I want to buy a property in some historic town, Bath, Oxford, Canterbury, and open a guest house." Claire didn't answer immediately. She kept looking at the gardenias as if they could confirm or contradict what she was hearing. "You know hospitality better than anyone I know," Martha continued. "You know how to welcome people, how to cook, how to make any space feel clean and inviting. You have the skill that makes a guest house truly work, not the kind that looks pretty in photos, but disappoints when people arrive." She looked at Claire directly. "And I need a partner I can trust completely, someone I know will never betray me." There was a gentle, unintentional irony in that argument, which both recognized without needing to comment. Claire remained silent for a long time. She thought of Patricia, who was graduating in nutrition and had dreamed of working in a place with its own kitchen and fixed clientele. She thought of Mrs. Connie, who had been born in a small town and had spent the last 30 years saying she would one day return to the countryside. She thought of the 15 years of buses at 5 in the morning. She thought of what it was like to have something of her own, something with her own name, a story that began the way she chose. She thought of Laurie, who had spoken the truth when no one else had the courage. "I accept," she said. Martha closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, there was something in them that Claire recognized as genuine relief, not the relief of someone who had solved a problem, but of someone who had found something they had lost. The following months were a period of activity Claire hadn't experienced even in the busiest times of those 15 years. The mansion was put up for sale and bought by a couple of entrepreneurs in less than 40 days, because the Kensington location spoke louder than any negotiation. The family moved to a simpler, more honest 3-bedroom apartment in Notting Hill, which Isabella decorated herself with plants and string lights, and which soon felt more like home than the mansion ever had. The property they found was in Bath, in the historic heart of the Cotswolds. It was a colonial house with a faded pink facade, a wooden veranda, and a backyard that had a century-old mango tree and a clean water spring at the back. It was in a state of abandonment but with a solid structure, and when Claire entered for the first time and smelled the old wood and damp earth, something inside her said, "This is it." The renovation took 8 months. Marcus took care of all the structural work and construction, applying for the first time without financial pressure the engineering knowledge that had fueled decades of his career. He still attended the Thursday sessions of the support group at St. Michael's Church on Elmwood Avenue, even after moving, because he had found a mentor in the coordinator who helped him understand that addiction was not a weakness of character, but a behavioral equation that could be relearned. Over time, his way of carrying his own weight changed. The wedding ring stopped spinning on his finger. Martha handled the marketing with an energy she didn't even know she had stored up. She created the guest house's profile, photographed each restored room, wrote texts that had the warmth of someone who truly loved the place. Reservations began even before the opening. Isabella enrolled in a hotel management course at the Federal University in Oxford, which was 45 minutes from Bath, and began helping with social media with the natural ease of someone who grew up in the digital language. She was the one who filmed Claire in the kitchen, who documented guests having breakfast on the veranda with the mango tree in the background, who created the reels that occasionally went viral and brought reservations from London, from other cities, sometimes from outside the UK. And Claire was the soul of Laurie's guest house. Her name Isabella had suggested, and everyone had immediately approved, because there was a poetic justice in it that no invented name could surpass. She welcomed guests with that perfect presence, that way of making anyone feel expected. She handled hospitality as someone who knows that hospitality is not a service, it's generosity. And every Friday afternoon, at a round table under the mango tree, she gave Cotswolds cuisine cooking classes for groups of up to 8 guests, classes that became the most popular program at the guest house, and which Patricia, her daughter, trained in nutrition, helped adapt for people with dietary restrictions. Mrs. Connie came to live with them 6 months after the opening. She sat on the veranda on the first afternoon, breathed the Cotswolds air, looked at the cobblestone street and the hills in the background and said, "It took a while, but we made it." 2 years after the inauguration, on a winter afternoon in the Cotswolds when the sky was so blue it seemed painted, the family gathered on the veranda for afternoon tea at 4 o'clock. It was all of them, Marcus and Martha, who remained married and had discovered that the crisis had also been a second chance to get to know each other. Isabella, who was in her 3rd year of university and had published an article on sustainable tourism. Patricia, who had moved to Bath and officially worked as a menu consultant for the guest house. Mrs. Connie, who had become the informal authority on caramel dessert recipes and whom guests called Grandma. And Claire, who sat at the head of the table because she was the partner and also because no one else seemed willing to sit there. Laurie was also on the veranda, in the golden cage that had made the journey from London to Bath in the back seat of Isabella's car, wrapped in a crochet blanket. He had charmed the guest house guests with the same efficiency with which he had 2 years earlier, revealed the truth of an afternoon that could have destroyed a life. Martha raised her glass of guava juice. "To Laurie," she said, "who spoke when it mattered." Laurie remained quiet for a moment that everyone thought would last until the end of tea, but then, with that clear, precise, and absolutely drama-free voice that was uniquely his, the Parrot said, "The truth saves the family." There was a general burst of laughter, the kind that starts in one place and catches everyone one by one, that doesn't have just one reason, but 1,000 reasons together. That is at once the laughter of now and the laughter of everything that happened to get here. Claire laughed with that deep laugh she reserved for great joys. Mrs. Connie clapped her hands. Isabella filmed everything. And on the stone next to the main entrance of Laurie's guest house, engraved by a local artist on an October afternoon, was the phrase that no one had needed to invent. Because a green parrot with yellow eyes had already said it, at the exact moment it needed to be said. The truth saves the family. The end of the story. If Claire and Laurie's story touched your heart, know that every week we bring new emotional stories of ordinary people who, in the face of the greatest adversities, chose honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to start anew. If you believe that truth transforms lives, leave a comment telling us which part of the story moved you the most. Your reflection can inspire someone who is reading now and going through a difficult time. Like, share with someone who needs to hear a story of hope today, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters of this journey of second chances. Because, as Laurie taught us, the truth always finds a way to speak.